Welcome to Include NYC's Disability Inc. podcast about advocacy. My name is Sherelle Cruikshank, and I am the proud executive director of Include NYC. For those who may not know much about us, Include NYC is the leading provider of training and information for young people in New York City with any disability from birth to 26, as well as for their families and the professionals who support them. As a citywide nonprofit, this past year, we assisted more than 16,000 people and reached more than 400,000 New Yorkers through communications and community outreach, all free of charge to our participants. We envision a world where there is love, equity, and access for all young people with disabilities. Advocacy has always mattered at Include NYC. However, advocacy is not only for people who identify as advocates. Because the independence and well-being of life successes for people with disabilities depends on public policies and laws, we know how important it is for each of us to get involved and be an advocate. The actions of everyday people matter, and each one of us has a role in helping people lead the kind of lives they want to live. But you may have found yourself wondering, what does advocacy really mean to me? And how can I make a difference in a way that fits my life and capacity? I'm excited to continue our series of conversations, Advocacy, What Does It Mean to You? To encourage members of our community to see what they can do, even if they've never done it before. This series will present the voices of a community organizer, an elected representative, and a powerful parent. And today I am pleased to introduce our guest, the powerful parent, Yvette Watts, the executive director of the New York Association for Emerging and Multicultural Providers. But more importantly, she is a mom of a 40-year-old woman living with autism. Yvette, thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today. So tell our listeners first, what is NIAMP?
Well, first, I want to thank you, Sherelle, for inviting me to speak. I was more than honored. I've worked with you before. You know that we've done a lot of good things for NIAMP, which I'm going to explain. And it's NIAMP, it's the acronym which our industry thrives on. So it's the New York Association of Emerging and Multicultural Providers. And what it is, when those of you that are in the OPWDD world or the IDD world, um, it's a provider association. And it was started in 2006 by executive directors of different ethnic groups who they appreciate the current provider associations that are out there right now, but they thought because of their particular niche, they needed their own. And their niche is that they reach a very large, underserved, and vastly diverse group of individuals in the five boroughs, Long Island and upstate. So a lot of them were executive directors of their own agencies. I mean, from the Haitian community, the Hispanic, the Hasidic group, the Hispanic. I have 40 agencies that I represent. So we're vastly inclusive of all types of different ethnic groups. So those executive directors came in 2006 and they started NIAMP. And then in 2007, they approached me as a very involved parent at the time. Would I mind being the executive director? So here it is, 2025, and I'm still here.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
So when did you begin or start being an advocate or even realize that you were an advocate?
Well, that's a really good question, Sherelle, because my daughter was born in 2000, I'm sorry, in 1985. And I was working in a totally different profession. I was working in magazine publishing. I was at the Atlantic Monthly, living my own life, excited, my only child. Me and my husband thought we really, captured the American dream. Is that what it's called? I'm not quite sure anymore. But we were excited. And I guess I was a parent until they said those very words to me, there's a possibility that she's autistic like. And that was when she was about 18 months.
Mhm.
And it's funny the transition from parent to advocate because they overlap, and especially back in 1985 when the incidence for autism was every 10,000, one in every 10,000 births. So you can imagine. I hope that answered your question.
That's surprise. Yeah, no, for sure. So, um, how did you begin advocacy for your daughter?
Well, you know what, really, it came out of necessity because I was working very hard, and I did have, at the time, my grandmother, who was just a gem. She was in preschool at the Birch Center at the time. And although they were very helpful, I mean, life goes on. It's not, work is 9 to 5, and the bus gets there at 2. And then she's all over the place because the behaviors are very different than a child of 18 months or 2 or 3. And the early intervention was 0 to 3 at the time, which is a godsend. I don't understand why people don't understand how important early intervention is. So at the time, it was fine. It was, going along, and that time they placed you not by any type of discipline that they could do. They just did it by if the child sat, if they ran around or whatever, and you really don't know what was going on. And then all of a sudden, when they start to go and they have to give a label at 5, then I really realized that she was autistic, no more autistic like. And my grandmother unfortunately passed, and I was really alone. I was alone.
Mhm.
And although you have financial and sort of amount of success in the business that you've chosen, it was really frustrating because I called all over, and I thought it was there was no real initiative of how to help children with autism. So I really realized, me and my husband, we decided. Birch said to us that the graduating class unfortunately couldn't stay for the summer because they were low in funds. So I had a decision to make. Either um, I didn't have any decision because there was nobody to be, Birch wasn't going to let her go. So I said, you know what? I went into my then uh, director and I said, listen, I love working here, but I can't stay. My child is running around. I don't know what's going on. And we cried together, and I gave her 2 months because I just put a direct mail campaign out of, I think it was like 2.5 million pieces. For those of you that are in that industry, you know what I'm talking about. I gave her 2 months, and me and my husband, we did this Monopoly game. You go this day, you pick her up. I found a program, actually, that would drop her at 1:30, but we had to pick her up. So that's when I said in September, when she started into what they call then the SCI programs for children with autism in regular school units, I said, I'm going to find out what this autism is because I was training the pediatricians. We were doing so much on our own. And
Wow,
that's when I
training the
decided,
pediatricians, the parents are training
yeah,
the pediatricians.
yeah, yeah. So in September, I said I was going to stop. I was going to see what this was. And that was the day of my total advocacy. And I was no longer just a parent.
Wow, wow. So advocacy and action started early for you.
It did, only because there was no what you have today. There was no real help.
And what about securing services? You talked about the fact that you had to find services, but once you found them, was it easy to secure them for you, or was further advocacy needed?
Well, it was interesting back then because in the schools, these units, at the time, they had no real methodology for teaching children with autism. I mean, I used to go in and, they were running around, but the teachers were these were just special ed teachers. So then what started happening, and you can relate to this, Sherelle, having been in this industry, all of a sudden we had this thing called Medicaid waiver.
Hmm.
Okay. And it's just what it said. It waived services that would pay a vehicle to pay for these services based on the individual's disability and not on family income. So all of a sudden, these agencies, small and big, started coming to the schools. And by that time, I had become the PTA president. And
Okay.
they, and they were coming and they were trying to find out how could they solicit parents. And it was funny at the time, we had a very large agency, all these beautiful, uh, uh, charts and everything like that, why to come and pamphlets. But I picked a small agency because I really thought that I could maneuver my way through, and I did. And I'll tell you the truth, it changed Jade's life because what happened, and mine as well, because at 5, wait, was it 7? I believe. Okay, so here she is, the best time of her life. I guess about 5. She's all running around between 9 and 2 in the school. But then when I started receiving services from this agency that started what they called LOVAS, it was 40 hours of training. It's a methodology that's proven successful in training children with autism how to speak, how to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, Jade started speaking at 7.
Oh,
It
how
changed our
amazing.
life. Yes and no, and leave me alone was great. So that's when it was wonderful that they would have trained individuals come in. It would be through reinforcements of whatever, maybe candy or whatever, but it was repetitiveness, and she really learned how to talk. And so I said, this is crazy. The best portion of her day, she's running around. And then when she comes home, she's doing all this real frustrating learning. So at the time, I was one of the few parents, minority parents, that what they called sued the Board of Education for what they call a Nickerson note. And that means that you're saying that this particular school does not have sufficient services to meet her needs. And so I
So
went to
you got a
CSE.
Nickerson letter for her.
Right, and I got an attorney, and we got it, and I sent her to Eden 2 in Staten Island, which at the time was one of the 853 schools that really knew ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis. So she and 3 other kids commuted from Queens to Staten Island,
Wow.
5 days a week.
So would you consider that advocacy or activism? Can you tell me what the difference is and where do you find yourself? Either or both?
Both, because the advocacy was for what I wanted for her, and the what was the other one?
Activism.
Activism was that the other 2 children on the bus benefited from me telling the transportation company, no, you're not going to get off of the BQE and pick up 7 other kids and keep these kids on the bus all all day long. So we worked together, the 3 of us, and we every year we would tell the transportation company who we were. They even started to get to know who we were. Don't even ask us, can any more get on that? Just the 3 kids, which they all lived in Queens, would go back and forth from Jade being 7 to 21.
Wow. So do you find that in activism that people hear you better? Or and does it take more than just telling a story to really have activism to work in your child or in someone's favor?
I would say advocacy was great in those early days because it was plentiful. The services were, you could reach out and get them. The waiting lists were shrinking at the time. But activism is so important right now. You have to, if you really want to help, your lone voice is nice, but you have to, there's so many, like New York, include New York, NIDA, there's a New York Fair group. There's so many established groups with parents or parents working with providers that you can get involved and that you can help them because parental input is so important. But you can help them to collectively have the same message. And that's the important thing. Um, we need
Okay.
that because me advocating out there by myself, if the system goes down, means absolutely nothing.
Right. Right. So there are many kinds of advocacy. There's many kinds of ways to be involved in activism. There are letter writing, calls, short videos, sharing personal stories. There's social media. there's testimonies at public hearings. How do you decide what is the best platform to use when you're in the midst of doing advocacy?
Well, that comes from the group in which you decide to establish yourself with. Um, I happen to be, because I'm the director of NIAMP. I'm with NIDA, which is New York Disabilities Advocates. So together, we will sometimes decide who does what best, who's best to talking to the legislators, who's best to talk about the acts. That means what we want in the budget, who's
Mhm.
good to tell their story as a parent. So when you have those kinds of established entities that you can work with, you can find out what you do best to help the overall cause.
Okay. And what kind of advocacy or activism does NIAMP do, actually? What are some of the focuses that NIAMP does?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I work with I find myself less with the parents unless I go to the parental active organizations. But NIAMP, what I think is important, because what I've involved in too, is it's so important to help the providers
Okay.
to help the parents. And what I've learned is it doesn't matter what your social or economical level is in life. When you have an individual with a developmental disability, we're in the same boat. From the most lovely communities in New York to the most low income, that the need is the same. They need services. And I really love working with agencies to provide assistance in them maintaining their uh, stability. um, these agencies are not as large, the multicultural agencies and small and emerging, as the bigger agencies. They're colleagues, but they're just as important because they are in those neighborhoods that they represent. And they know before the front door, people could walk right up there and parents could receive assistance and they could walk them through the process. Well, now there's the front door and you have to go through OPWDD, but once you get there, they can really help you.
Okay.
And I think that's everything because and there's so many nuances in language and culture that I think needs to be addressed, and that's what NIAMP does. We really help. We go through trainings. We represent them with OPWDD. Um, I personally find myself, really finding out what they need and really going and pushing for that for them because right now there are a lot of agencies out there. There are over 400 agencies that offer services, and the bigger agencies have the bigger names and so forth, and I think they're wonderful, but I do think that we need to exist.
Absolutely. So how do you measure the success of advocacy? What do you look at?
Sherelle, it's interesting because way back when she was first diagnosed, I used to think, and a lot of parents, because I was in support groups, we all thought we were gonna, they're gonna get cured, they're gonna get cured. I don't measure it like that. I measure it by the quality of life which a person with a disability can obtain.
Right. Because we know that disabilities are not cured.
Right.
Autism is not cured. But you can enhance the quality of life
Yes.
for them. So that's what you look at as your barometer for whether advocacy is being successful.
Yes. Very much. Uh, are they living within the communities they live in? Are they able to excel at their talents? My daughter is excellent on the computer. She has that talent. She loves music, so I make sure that the individuals that come in here, the DSPs, the backbone of these agencies, take her to have music and expose whatever she likes to do. They're like her girlfriends. They're paid friends.
And the DSPs are her direct support staff, professionals, should I
Yes,
say, right?
absolutely.
So just for those who
Absolutely.
may not be clear. So in your experience, what do you think has made the most impact?
Uh, you mean what I've done for them, what I've done, my
Or just in
advocacy?
terms of what kind of advocacy you think has made the biggest impact, and what would that impact be?
Well, I think the fact that I am a double hitter, that I am a parent and that I am in the industry. And I have found that it really helps the agencies, it helps the parents, it helps me to see the broader picture.
Okay.
And I think that av when they come for me, advocacy groups, they'll say to me, "Oh, Yvette, you're great because you can speak on both behalves." And I think it's really made a difference.
That's wonderful.
Mhm.
So what about parents who haven't really done any advocacy and they don't feel like they have a voice? They may be, I don't know, maybe they're shy to talk in crowds, or feel that they don't deliver stories well. What do you say to people who feel that way?
Well, I used to think that we had enough parents because back then the parents were so involved. But now I think that you you have to get involved. You have to listen. We all have gifts. And even if you help us to fill a stadium, even, when I go up to Albany, we have to rally very hard prior to budget to let them know that we mean what we say when we ask for what we ask for. And when I look around and I don't see parents, it makes me very sad
Mm,
because we need the numbers. We need them to understand that we mean what we say. Here's who we are. We are vastly uh, diverse. And I don't care if you're a parent that's been around for a while, and I want to see more younger parents. I mean, this Zoom is great, but we really need to see physical parents out there. So I think the answer to your question is it makes me sad that you think that you're not worth anything because you are, even if you're just there physically to help us.
okay, so that sounds like that's a good starting point, right? For someone who wants to kind of get their feet wet and kind of see if they can really do meaningful advocacy and help to make a difference. Is that when you start, like just being in the room?
Absolutely. Right now, the threat of any type of takedown of Medicaid is a threat. And
Absolutely.
we look at the news and we see that it has no real methodology. But, when you think about the federal government and you understand that, Jarrell, that they're 50% of the state's uh, uh,
Budget.
Medicaid, it's
Mhm.
important that that Medicaid is already spent and it's needed. So it's almost like you don't have an option not to advocate anymore.
You
And
just
it's
have to
nice.
be out there, you're
You have to be
saying.
out there. When you're called, when the agencies or these groups call you, when they ask you to go to Albany, if you're, and listen, I understand about work, plan your vacations accordingly, but we have to make sure we secure. Because you know what? Wherever your child is right now, if they're home, in a school program, you're not going to live forever. We have
That's
to make
right.
sure that our residential programs are secured. We have to do a lot.
Do you think that advocacy ever ends?
No. Uh, I'm the board president of a very large agency for children with autism, and we have 50% of the board that are parental, and trust me, they continue, and they just astonish me what they do. Yes, they advocate, and some of them have gone on, and their children are left in the residential programs, and a lot of them make sure the ones that are still around that their advocacy for their own personal child is beneficial to everyone that's in that house and every house that's a part of that agency. So it's never over,
So it
but you
sounds
can
like
get a break.
everybody has, yeah, sounds like everybody has a place in advocacy, then they just have to find what that place is for them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, that's wonderful. Yvette, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom and your experience. And I really do hope that parents that listen to this feel motivated to stand up and be a part of advocacy, because we do believe that advocacy is extremely important to and for the lives of children and youths with disabilities, in order for them to be as successful as possible in whatever way they choose to live their life as they become adults. So, any last words before we say goodbye?
Just that I was happy to help and be here. Sherelle, I've always enjoyed working with you, and the fact that you're now somewhere else where you're reaching even more individuals and their families is such a lovely thing to hear. We need as much representation out there as possible. I thank you for the job you did when you were here and what you're doing there. And I just want to tell parents, you know, it's what it is. But thank God that we live in a country and we live in states where we can receive services to help us with our children.
But if we want to keep those
But if we want to
services,
keep
we
those,
got to fight for it, right? Continue to
we have to fight.
advocate. Well, thank you, Yvette. Thank you for sharing your words of wisdom. And thank you for being a part of Include NYC's Disability Inc. podcast around advocacy and where people can find themselves. So, with that, we'll say goodbye.